A few weeks ago I made a video about a force feedback joystick that also includes a strain gauge sensor. I promised to make a separate video on that sensor. This is that video. But before I go into the specifics of what I built, I want to go over the basics of strain gauges in general. First, what is a strain gauge and how does it actually work? Here you can see probably the most ubiquitous gauge you can buy, the BF 350-3AA. It goes for €2 for a lot of 50 or so. They are just 7.5 by 4.5 millimeter in size. The meandering path you can see is a conductive metal bonded tightly to a flexible backing. When this is mounted rigidly to a part, it will stretch and contract together with the part. These mechanical changes in the gauge let it act as a variable resistor. Like this elastic strap, when it is pulled, it obviously gets longer. In the gauge, this increases the resistance. Maybe less obvious is that the band also gets thinner, reducing the cross-section. In the traces of the strain gauge, that also happens. Both of these mechanisms lead to a higher resistance when stretched. If contracted, the opposite happens. The traces get shorter and a little thinner, reducing the resistance. But due to the minuscule change in resistance these gauges see, it cannot be read out by an ordinary voltage divider. Usually a Wheatstone bridge is used. Looking it up on Wikipedia, we find this. The article explains how to use the circuit to measure a single unknown value. Feel free to pause to read it. But we can do better for our use case. We will use a round tube that, when strained in one direction, experiences tension on one side and compression on the other side. By placing strain gauges on both sides, we can take advantage of this. We can replace resistor R1 and Rx with two strain gauges on the tension side of the tube and resistor R2 and R3 with two strain gauges on the compression side. This configuration forms a full Wheatstone bridge and provides 4 times the sensitivity compared to a setup that uses only a single strain gauge. With that knowledge, we can jump into CAD to design the actual part the gauges will be adhered to. This is the full CAD model of the stick base. We see the stick interface here. On the lower end, it is mounted to the gimbal with 2 bearings that are preloaded with 2 gem nuts. On the upper end is a M36 by 2 mm thread to receive a flight stick. The section in the middle is where the gauges will go. To tune this in a way that is still strong enough to not plastically deform, but elastic enough to give a good signal for the gauges, we will have to decide on the material and the wall thickness. For the material I chose aluminium, as it has a relatively low Young's modulus. The Young's modulus gives the rate of elastic deformation. In most cases a high Young's modulus, and with that a high stiffness is desirable. But for this part more elastic deformation is wanted. To still retain a good margin of safety against plastic deformation, 7075 aluminium was chosen as the specific alloy. To be able to perform an FEA additionally to the geometry of the part and the material, the boundary conditions needed to be set. In this case, it is just a fixed condition on the bearing surface and a linear force on the M36 thread in one bending direction. The strength of the applied force is a bit tricky to find. I chose to assume that the maximum applied force would be around 15 kilograms or around 150 Newton at the stick, which would be about 25 centimeters from the gimbal fulcrum. Calculating back to the thread, this gives 535 Newton. With this, multiple simulations with different wall thicknesses can be run. At a final wall thickness of 0.5 mm, I found a good middle of strength and elasticity. With these results, I built the actual part. So, off to the lathe we go. Facing first. And after the first full-length turning cut, I noticed that I did not have enough length. So this time with actual measuring the stick out that I should have measured in the first place. Turning the first 3 shoulders, coming close to the 18mm outer diameter on the shoulder that will hold the gauges. This diameter is somewhat important, as the wrong diameter will result in wrong gauge placement. I noted a bit of taper and decided that I should support with the tailstock. A tenth of a millimeter more or less will likely not matter, but let's try to be precise. And now cleaning up the end face of the shoulder. The next shoulder will carry 2 bearings and thus should actually be precise. I tried doing balanced cuts, but a 4/100th taper was present and I corrected with files and emery paper. But in the end, we have a nice fit. Now cutting the 2 needed threads, one for tensioning the bearing seats and the other for the stick interface. And lastly for the setup, drilling part way from this side for the stick cables to pass through. After cutting the waste on the bandsaw, we can set up for the second operation. For this I changed to collets to hold on the 18mm diameter. We get to final length by facing. Next I drilled through to make space for the boring bar. Then I bore out the big short inner shoulder. The depth and diameter of this shoulder is really not too important. Lastly, boring the long section to thin out the wall for the strain gauges. Here I made a big mistake. I set the boring bar so it could barely reach the needed depth to hold on to as much stiffness as I could. With a solid tool post and a part as deep in the collet as possible, I could not reach the needed depth. I should have installed the top slide to get closer or at least reset the bar to reach. But what I did instead was to pull the part slightly out of the collet. The result of that will be seen in just a few seconds. I carried on boring out the inside to a wall thickness of only 0.5 millimeter. And there we have it. At this point I actually watched the DRO to hit the end depth and noticed what happened only after I finished the cut. So yeah, I redid all of that, but with less mistakes. With the parts done, I could now build the actual sensor assembly. The first assembly I did was done by eye with wiring point to point. This led to noticeable crosstalk between the 2 bending axes, and it took forever. These problems led to the development of a flex PCB with cutouts for the gauges at the correct spots, and it has all the needed wiring already implemented. Let's prepare everything for the gluing process. For this I made a simple block of wood to work on and give a solid foundation. On top I fix a piece of painter's tape sticky side up. On that I place the flex PCB with the solder pads down. You can see a second flex PCB in this shot. That is so I remember which side the pads have to go to. Now I place the gauges also with the solder pads down in the cutouts. This is a bit fiddly, but not too bad. With this layer done, I clean the surfaces that will be glued with a bit of isopropyl alcohol. Before the actual gluing, I cut the flex PCB free, making sure I go close to the PCB on one side, but leave a good amount of painter's tape on the other. The glue I used is Loctite 401. This is really just a general purpose super glue. I don't know if this will be long-term stable, but it works fine so far. I just put the glue directly on the PCB. In this case I overdid it a bit. You really don't need much. It flows quite well, and even a few drops will spread to coat the whole surface. The important part is to tightly wrap it around the stick. I started by using the additional painter's tape that I had still on the side of the PCB. Additionally, I wrapped sellotape. With that, I tried to wrap it as tight as I could. I did deburr the turned part, but it seems I did not do this good enough, as I did cut myself on the thread. So you could say I bled for your entertainment. If that is not worth subscribing, I don't know what is. On the next morning I unpacked this, being very careful to do it slowly. It is possible to pull the pads off the strain gauges. I expect that is due to the extremely low price of the gauges. The flex PCB is much stronger in that regard, and it is also way better solderable. As we are on the point of soldering, I first tinned every pad on the assembly, and then I connected the pads from the separate gauges to the corresponding pads on the flex PCB with short lengths of silver coated copper wire. Lastly, I connected the cables to the assembly. With that, the assembly is done. I wanted to know how good the separation between the two bending axes really is, but trying it by hand did not really work, as I never could tell if visible crosstalk was due to incorrectly made sensors or due to slight inaccuracies in me applying the force. To test this reliably, I would need a way to hold the assembly rigidly and apply a force in only one axis. For this, I mounted the assembly in a universal angle head in my CNC mill. Here you can see the setup, with a mounted assembly and a piece of aluminium plate to even out the contact, and in the milling spindle a dowel pin to apply the force. The gauges are connected to the TI evaluation board, as it has a nice interface with visualization of the signal over time. For the actual test, I set the assembly to an angle that visually was not aligned to the axis of pressure. I then started the data capture and moved the mill over by 1/10 of a millimeter twice with a second or so in between. I moved away again in the same manner. In the graphs you can see the two bending axes over time. It is captured at 4 kHz. The graph shows, as is expected, that both axes see the signal. Setting the assembly to be visually aligned with the force gives already a really good separation of the axes. Rotating a bit further overshoots slightly. Going back just a little gives an almost perfect result. With that orientation found, I milled flats to align the assembly in the rest of the joystick base. If you liked this video, you know what to do. And if you have any further questions, I'm happy to answer them in the comments. This is all I have for you today. I hope to see you next time.